He woke up before the sun as he always did, though today felt heavier than any other morning. The quiet of the small house seemed louder than usual. The walls, though familiar, felt like they were closing in. He moved carefully, not wanting to wake his wife, who was still asleep. She had been unwell for weeks now, and the sight of her struggling to breathe and move around slowly had pierced his heart in ways he couldn't fully describe. He had always thought of himself as strong enough to face anything, but seeing someone you love in pain makes even the strongest person feel powerless. He quietly went to the kitchen, trying not to make a sound. The small gas stove hissed softly as he boiled water for tea. The kettle was old, dented, and chipped, but it still worked. He leaned against the counter for a moment, staring out of the window at the empty street. The neighborhood was waking up slowly. A few shopkeepers were opening their shutters. The smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery drifted faintly in the morning air, and a few children were playing near the corner, laughing and running. Life was going on for everyone else, as if nothing had changed. But for him, the world felt like it had stopped. His wife stirred slightly in her sleep, groaning softly. He went back to her side, placing a hand on hers. Her skin felt colder than usual, and he could see the worry etched on her face even before she opened her eyes. She smiled weakly at him, a smile that was meant to be comforting but only made his heart ache more. She didn't want him to worry, but he couldn't help it. He had tried to be strong for her, but every day the weight of the bills and the mounting expenses of her treatment pressed down on him. The hospital had given them a number, a figure so high it made his stomach twist into knots. He had looked at it many times, hoping it was a mistake. But each time he read it, the fear returned with the same intensity. He had tried everything he could think of, borrowing money from friends and family, asking for small loans, working extra hours at his factory job, but none of it was enough. The bills kept coming. The treatment kept costing more, and he could see the desperation in his wife's eyes when she tried to hide her fear from him. He couldn't bear the thought of losing her. He couldn't let her give up hope, but he also didn't know how to make the money appear out of nowhere. Every plan he made seemed to fall short, and every failed attempt left him feeling smaller, more helpless. But he couldn't give up, not now, not ever. He sat down at the edge of the bed, resting his head in his hands, trying to think. He remembered passing by a street corner a few days ago, near the market, where a man was shining shoes. The man's hands moved quickly, efficiently, and with a skill that came from years of practice. People stopped for a moment, dropped a coin or two, and went on their way. It wasn't much, but it seemed like a steady way to earn something quickly. The thought came suddenly, like a spark in the dark. Maybe he could try that. Maybe he could shine shoes. He had never done it before, had never even held a proper brush or polish, but he would learn. He had to. The idea both terrified and inspired him. He had never been the type of person to work on the street, asking strangers for money, but desperation gave him courage. He could imagine standing there, hands stained with polish, back aching from hours of work, and yet feeling a sense of purpose for the first time in weeks. Every coin earned would be a step closer to saving her life. The thought of seeing her smile, free from fear and pain, was enough to push him forward. He couldn't waste time thinking about dignity or pride. There was no room for those when someone you love is in danger. He spent the day preparing. He borrowed a small shoe polishing kit from a friend who had once tried it himself, and he practiced at home, using his own worn-out shoes as a test. At first he struggled. The brushes were awkward in his hands, the polish smeared instead of shining, and he accidentally ruined one of his own shoes. He felt frustrated, and the temptation to give up whispered in his mind. But then he thought of her face, the way she tried to hide her fear, the way she trusted him to protect her, and that thought, stronger than anything else, silenced the doubts. He would learn. He had no choice. The next morning, he went out early, just as the street was beginning to fill with life. He carried his small kit with trembling hands, unsure if he was ready, but determined to try. He found a spot near a busy corner, where people walked past on their way to work or school. His heart raced as he set up the small wooden stool and wiped the brushes carefully. He watched other people for a moment, studying how they worked, how they handled the shoes and the polish. He imitated what he had seen, fumbling at first, his hands shaking. Some people stopped watching him, curious about this newcomer. Others passed without noticing, caught up in their own lives. He didn't let it bother him. Every moment he spent there was a chance to earn something, a chance to save her. The first customer came sooner than he expected. An older man in worn shoes stopped and asked him if he could shine them. The man hesitated for a moment, then handed over the shoes. He took a deep breath, trying to remember what he had practiced. The polish went on unevenly at first, and he apologized, feeling embarrassed. But the man smiled patiently, letting him continue. By the time he finished, the shoes had a decent shine, and the man dropped a few coins into his small cup. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make his heart lift slightly. He realized that every person he helped, every shoe he polished, was a small victory, a step closer to saving her life. As the day went on, he found his rhythm. He learned to move faster, to spread the polish evenly, and to make the shoes look as good as new. People began to notice him, some stopping to watch, some leaving tips when they saw his dedication. He began to feel a small spark of hope that had been missing for so long. He was tired, his back ached, and his hands were stained with polish, but he didn't mind. The fatigue was a small price to pay for the chance to help her. Every coin he earned was a promise to keep fighting no matter how hard it was. At the end of the day, he counted his earnings. It wasn't enough for the full treatment, not even close, but it was a start. He thought of all the days ahead, of all the shoes he would shine, of all the sweat and effort it would take, and he felt determined. He would not let despair take over. He would continue day after day because love demanded it, because giving up was not an option. That night he went home quietly, carrying the small cup of coins carefully. He entered the house where she was waiting, still weak but smiling. He handed her a coin, joking lightly about how he was becoming a master shoe shiner. She laughed softly, a sound that warmed his heart more than anything else in the world. They shared a quiet dinner, their conversation light but filled with unspoken worries. Yet in that moment there was hope, fragile but alive. He knew the road ahead would be long and exhausting, but he also knew that he had taken the first step. He had chosen action over despair, courage over fear, and love over hopelessness. As he lay down that night staring at the ceiling, he thought about the days to come. There would be challenges, exhaustion, moments of doubt, maybe even ridicule from strangers, but he also knew that he had something stronger than all of that. He had purpose. He had determination. He had love that refused to let him quit. And as he drifted off to sleep, he felt a small, quiet sense of pride. He had begun the fight, and nothing could take that away from him. The next morning, he woke up before dawn again, feeling the ache in his back and hands from the day before. Every muscle protested as he rose from the bed, but the thought of her waiting for him kept him moving. He prepared a small breakfast for both of them, careful not to make too much noise. She smiled at him, weak but encouraging, and he smiled back, hiding the exhaustion that was already settling deep in his bones. He could see it in her eyes that she appreciated his effort, but he could also see the worry that he could not erase. Every day, the fear of not earning enough money pressed harder on him. Still, he knew he had no choice but to keep going. He packed his small kit and stepped out into the cool morning air. The streets were beginning to hum with life. Shopkeepers were opening their stores, street vendors were shouting their prices, and the clatter of early commuters filled the air. He set up at the same busy corner as the day before, his hands trembling slightly as he arranged the brushes and polish. He tried to steady himself, taking a deep breath, and reminded himself that every polished shoe was a step closer to saving her. The thought of quitting never entered his mind. It could not. He had made a promise, even if only to himself, and he intended to keep it. At first, the day moved slowly. Few people stopped, and those who did gave only a coin or two, barely enough to buy food. He felt frustrated, tired, and discouraged. His hands ached, his back was stiff, and he felt sweat trickling down his face. At moments like these, it would have been easy to give up, to pack up and go home pretending he had tried. But every time he looked at a passing woman with polished shoes or a man in need of attention, he remembered her face, the way she trusted him to fight for her. That thought alone was stronger than his fatigue or doubt. He started noticing patterns as he worked. Some customers were generous, leaving a little extra when they saw the effort he put into his work. Others were impatient or critical, making him feel small and clumsy. He had to learn how to handle both without losing focus. Sometimes a man would complain that the polish wasn't even enough or that he was taking too long. At first he felt ashamed and frustrated, but then he learned to smile politely, apologize sincerely, and do his best regardless of the criticism. Over time, he began to gain confidence in his ability. Each polished shoe was no longer just about earning money. It became a small act of pride, a quiet rebellion against the hopelessness that threatened to swallow him. By mid-morning, the sun had climbed higher, making the street hotter. He felt the sweat dripping down his back and the stiffness in his shoulders grow worse, but he didn't stop. He took small sips of water from a flask he carried and ate a piece of bread when he could, trying to keep his energy. Each coin dropped into his cup felt like a tiny victory, a small light in the growing darkness of his worry. He started to talk to people as he worked, sharing small jokes or polite words. Some smiled, some ignored him, but he noticed that many began to respect the determination in his eyes, even if they didn't know the reason behind it. As the days passed, he learned to work faster and more efficiently. He figured out the right amount of polish to use, the best way to brush without leaving streaks, and how to make shoes look almost new. Still, the work was grueling. Long hours on a hard street corner made his legs ache and his back stiff. Often by evening, his hands were raw and he would return home exhausted, barely able to speak. But he would still count the coins he had earned, mentally adding them to the total he needed for her treatment. Some nights the amount seemed laughably small compared to the massive cost of her care, and tears would fill his eyes. Yet every morning he would rise again and face the street, because hope was all he had left. He began noticing small moments of kindness from strangers. A woman left a cold bottle of water beside him on a hot day. A young boy offered him a sandwich, shyly smiling before running off. Each gesture, small as it seemed, reminded him that not everyone in the world was indifferent to the suffering of others. There were people willing to help even in tiny ways. These moments of humanity gave him a little more strength, a little more hope, and a little more faith that he could make it through this. Even when his body screamed in protest, his spirit was nourished by the kindness of others. One afternoon, a man stopped, carefully observing him as he worked. This man didn't just leave a coin or move on. He watched him quietly for a few minutes, as if trying to understand something. When the man finally spoke, he asked a few questions about his work, about how long he had been doing this and how he had learned to polish shoes. The man listened to his answers carefully, nodding occasionally. Finally, he smiled and offered a small piece of advice, a technique he had learned over years of experience. At first, he felt unsure about trying it. What if it didn't work? What if he ruined another pair of shoes? But something in the man's tone, something about the sincerity in his eyes, convinced him to give it a try. He realized that accepting help was not a sign of weakness, it was a step toward success. The new technique worked better than he expected. He was able to polish shoes faster, and they looked cleaner, shinier, and more appealing. People noticed. More customers began stopping, some leaving larger tips, and a few even came back the next day asking for him specifically. The stranger's advice had changed something small but significant in his day-to-day life. Suddenly, the hours of effort seemed less grueling. The coins in his cup added up faster, and his confidence grew. It was a reminder that sometimes, even when life seemed hopeless, guidance and kindness from someone else could make a real difference. Despite these small victories, the days were not without setbacks. Some days hardly anyone stopped, and he would return home feeling defeated. Rain poured down one afternoon, soaking his kit and making it almost impossible to work. Another day, someone criticized him harshly, making him feel clumsy and embarrassed in front of a crowd. Yet each time he reminded himself why he was doing this. Every struggle, every exhausted moment, every minor humiliation was nothing compared to the possibility of saving her life. He learned to accept the discomfort, to push through the fatigue, and to keep moving forward no matter what. At home, he and his wife had quiet evenings. She tried to hide her worry, but he could see it in her eyes. Sometimes she would take his hand and squeeze it, silently encouraging him to keep going. Other times, she would gently chide him for working too hard, reminding him to take care of himself. These small exchanges, simple yet heartfelt, became his anchor. They reminded him that he was not working for nothing, that someone was counting on him, and that love could fuel perseverance even in the hardest times. As the weeks went by, he began to notice a subtle change, not in his surroundings, but in himself. He had become more patient, more resilient, and more focused. The exhaustion still weighed heavily on his body, but his mind had grown sharper. He could estimate the right amount of polish in seconds, choose the best technique for each type of shoe, and handle even the most difficult customers with calm determination. He had transformed through struggle, not into someone without fatigue or fear, but into someone capable of facing them with unwavering courage. The money he earned slowly began to add up, though it was still far from the full amount needed for her treatment. He kept meticulous records, writing down every coin, every tip, and every small gift he received. Each number was a reminder of progress, no matter how small. Each coin was a symbol of hope, a tiny building block in the larger goal of saving her life. Though the road ahead was long, he began to feel that he was making tangible steps toward a future where she could be healthy again. And yet, despite the small successes, there were nights when despair crept back in. He would sit quietly in their small kitchen, staring at the coins, wondering if it would ever be enough. He would replay the long days in his mind, remembering the aches, the sweat, and the moments of doubt. Sometimes he felt like giving up, letting the fear win and surrendering to the impossibility of it all. But then he would hear her soft breathing in the next room, see the faint smile on her face when he returned home, and feel the unspoken trust she had in him. That trust became a shield against despair, a reminder that quitting was not an option. By the end of each long day, as he cleaned his kit and prepared to rest, he felt a mix of exhaustion and quiet pride. The road was still daunting, the nights long, and the treatment far from affordable, but he had taken the first, most crucial steps. He was no longer just a man facing impossible odds. He was a man fighting back, learning, improving, and slowly building a path forward. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, he felt a spark of hope that refused to die, no matter how many challenges lay ahead. Days had passed since he first received the stranger's advice, and already he could feel a change in the way life treated him. His hands were still rough, stained with polish, his back ached, and some mornings were harder than others. But now there was a new energy inside him, a quiet confidence that had been missing before. The advice had not just improved his work. It had given him hope that the impossible might slowly become possible. Every shoe he polished now seemed to carry more meaning. It was no longer just a way to earn coins. It was a symbol of his perseverance and of the life he was fighting to save. His mornings started earlier than ever. Before the sun rose, he was already on the street, setting up his small station, arranging brushes and polish with careful hands, and preparing himself mentally for the long hours ahead. The streets were quieter at first, but as the day progressed, people came and went, each one bringing a small chance to earn, a small chance to move closer to his goal. He had begun to notice regular customers, people who returned day after day because they appreciated the effort and dedication he put into his work. It gave him a sense of purpose, seeing that his skill was valued and respected even in small ways. He also noticed that word of mouth was beginning to work in his favor. Some people would stop to watch him work, curious about how a man with no prior experience could shine shoes so carefully and efficiently. Others would compliment him on the shine or leave a little extra in his cup. Slowly, his small earnings started to grow at a faster pace than before. While it was still far from enough to cover all the medical expenses, it was enough to begin feeling like a real path forward. Each day brought new motivation, a reminder that perseverance was slowly rewarding him. One afternoon, as the sun beat down harshly on the busy street, a well-dressed man stopped and watched him work for several minutes. The man's gaze was thoughtful, as though he was measuring not just the polish on the shoes, but the effort, determination, and care behind it. When the man finally spoke, he asked how long he had been doing this, how he had learned, and what his goals were. The questions were simple, yet they carried an understanding that few strangers offered. The man listened quietly as he explained why he was doing this, the urgency, the desperation, and the love that fueled his actions. There was no judgment in the man's eyes, only a calm acknowledgement of his struggle. Then the man smiled and offered an unexpected opportunity. He explained that a few businesses nearby needed someone reliable to clean shoes for their employees, ensuring that the staff could present themselves neatly to customers. It wasn't a lot at first, but it paid more than street tips and would give him steady work without relying solely on the randomness of passerby generosity. The man also offered a piece of practical advice about handling clients professionally and making the most of his time efficiently. At first he felt unsure. Was it too good to be true? Could he manage something like this? But then he thought about his wife, the treatment and the promise he had made, and he knew he had no choice but to seize the opportunity. The very next day, he visited the businesses the stranger had mentioned. He met managers, introduced himself humbly, and explained that he could polish shoes with care and consistency. To his relief, they agreed to give him a chance, impressed by both his determination and the neat results he had already shown on the street. The first day at this new assignment was challenging. He had to adjust to schedules, move quickly between shoes, and ensure that each pair looked spotless. But he noticed something remarkable. The work that once seemed exhausting and discouraging now felt purposeful. The structure, the recognition, and the steady earnings brought him a new sense of pride. As days turned into weeks, his routine solidified. He would wake up before sunrise, prepare a small breakfast, and head to his assignments carrying the kit that had become an extension of himself. The street still called for him sometimes as regular customers continued to stop by, but now he had a steady base of clients who relied on him. The combination of street work and assigned jobs gradually brought him closer to the money he needed for her treatment. Every evening when he returned home exhausted but smiling, he could see her face light up. There was hope there now, a quiet reassurance that the struggle was worth it, that their efforts were paying off, and that he was making progress. Despite this success, the work was far from easy. His body still ached, and there were days when rain or heat made it unbearable. Once, during a particularly hot afternoon, he almost fainted from exhaustion and thirst, but he refused to leave the post until he had finished the last pair of shoes. Another day, a child accidentally spilled water on his freshly polished shoes, and he had to start over. He could have become frustrated, angry, or defeated, but instead he took a deep breath, cleaned the mess, and continued. He realized that these small challenges were part of the journey, tests of his patience and resolve. The work demanded not just skill, but heart, and he had plenty of that. During this time, he began noticing subtle changes in himself. He had grown more confident in approaching people, more patient with difficult customers, and more resilient in the face of setbacks. The fear that had once paralyzed him began to fade. He had learned to focus on the task at hand, to take each day as it came, and to trust in the process. Even when the earnings seemed small, he reminded himself that progress was still progress. The coins and tips he received now symbolized more than just money. They represented hope, perseverance, and love in action. At home, the atmosphere also began to shift. His wife, once quiet and anxious, started to show small signs of relief. She helped with small chores around the house, cooked simple meals when she had energy, and offered words of encouragement. Their relationship, tested by fear and uncertainty, became stronger. They shared stories about the day, laughed at small jokes, and supported each other quietly but firmly. She often reminded him not to overwork himself, but he would smile, knowing that every effort, no matter how taxing, was a step closer to saving her life. Their bond deepened, and with it his resolve strengthened even further. As the money began to grow, he started planning more carefully. He kept a notebook where he tracked every coin, every tip, and every payment from his assignments. He calculated how many more days of work it would take, planning strategically how to maximize his earnings. The thought of reaching the amount needed for her treatment no longer felt like a distant dream. It was a tangible goal within reach, fueled by his hard work, the advice of the stranger, and the support of those who had begun to notice his dedication. The sense of control, even over small things, brought him comfort and hope. Word of his determination started spreading quietly through the community. Neighbors and local shopkeepers began to recognize his efforts, some offering additional support, small loans, or encouragement. Occasionally, someone would offer advice, share a technique, or provide a small opportunity, echoing the help he had received from the stranger. These acts of kindness reminded him that human compassion existed in abundance, even in a world that often seemed indifferent. They reinforced his belief that perseverance and humility, combined with love and determination, could indeed change lives. By now, he had developed a rhythm that balanced street work, assigned jobs, and rest. His body was tired, yes, but his spirit was stronger than ever. He could see the results of his labor clearly. The coins added up, the shoes gleamed, and most importantly, the hope in his wife's eyes grew brighter. There were still hurdles to overcome, but he faced them with calm determination, no longer overwhelmed by the enormity of the challenge. Every step, no matter how small, brought him closer to the ultimate goal. One evening, as he returned home after a long day, he paused outside the small house, looking at the sky painted with the colors of dusk. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction and quiet pride. The journey was far from over, but he had overcome obstacles he never imagined possible. The stranger's advice had not only helped him improve his skill, but had opened a door to opportunity he would never have discovered on his own. He realized that life had a way of presenting help at unexpected times, and that accepting it with gratitude and humility could change everything. As he entered the house, he saw her waiting by the window, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. He held up his hands, showing the slight stains of polish, and she laughed softly, shaking her head at the sight. He smiled back, tired but happy, and they shared a quiet dinner together. The conversation was light, but beneath it was an unspoken acknowledgement of the struggle, the hope, and the love that fueled every day. He went to bed that night knowing that, while the journey was not over, they had reached a turning point. Hope had returned, stronger and brighter than before, and he was determined to see it through to the end. The morning sun crept slowly into the small house, painting the walls with a soft golden light. He woke early as always, but today he felt a little lighter. The long months of struggle, sweat, and endless work had brought him closer to a goal that had once seemed impossible. The coins and tips he had earned, combined with the steady jobs he had secured, had finally added up to the amount needed for her treatment. He held the envelope of money in his hands, feeling its weight, yet also feeling a lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in a long time. It was hope made tangible, hope made real by his effort, love, and unwavering determination. He looked at his wife, still asleep, her breathing gentle and even. The thought of what these months had been for flashed through his mind. The long mornings standing on the street, the aching back, the raw hands, the moments of doubt and despair, but none of it felt unbearable anymore. Every challenge had led to this moment. He remembered the stranger's advice, the people who had offered him small acts of kindness along the way, and the countless shoes he had polished under the scorching sun and in the pouring rain. Each experience, no matter how small or painful, had brought him closer to saving her life. Now it was time to act. He prepared a small breakfast, more out of routine than hunger, and watched her as she stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, and when she saw him, she smiled, weak but radiant with trust and love. He knelt beside her bed, placing the envelope gently on the table. She looked at it with surprise, confusion, and then realization. Tears filled her eyes as she understood what he had done. The months of sacrifice, the tireless work, the love that had carried him through the darkest days. She reached out and held his hand, and he felt the warmth of her grip, a silent thank you that spoke louder than any words could. The journey to the hospital was quiet. They spoke little, each lost in their own thoughts. For him, the trip was a culmination of countless small victories, of days spent in pain and determination. For her, it was a mixture of relief and gratitude, knowing that someone loved her so completely that they had endured so much to ensure her life would continue. When they arrived, the staff welcomed them warmly, and the medical team began the preparations for the treatment. As she lay on the hospital bed, he held her hand tightly, refusing to let go, drawing strength from each other silently. The treatment took hours, each passing moment stretching with tension and hope. He sat in the waiting area, hands still and mind restless, thinking about everything that had brought them here. He remembered the early mornings polishing shoes, the small victories that had felt insignificant at the time, and the relentless determination that had carried him through despair. He thought about the strangers who had offered advice, encouragement, and small acts of kindness. Without them, he might have faltered, might have given in to hopelessness, might have failed. But their support, combined with his love and persistence, had led to this moment. Finally, the doctor emerged with a smile. The treatment had been successful. Relief flooded him, so intense it brought tears to his eyes. He rushed to her side, and when she opened her eyes and saw him, she smiled weakly. But that smile was more beautiful than anything he had ever seen. He held her close, feeling the weight of the months lift slightly from his shoulders. They had made it. Together, through struggle, sacrifice, and unwavering love, they had reached a turning point in their lives. The future, once clouded with fear and uncertainty, now held a glimmer of promise. Returning home felt different this time. The streets, which had once been a place of endless toil and exhaustion, now seemed alive with possibility. He walked a little taller, not because the work was done, but because he had proven to himself what love and determination could achieve. People he had met along the way smiled at him, recognizing the effort he had put into everything. Some stopped to greet him, some left small tokens of encouragement, and he realized how much the journey had connected him to the world around him. Life was no longer just survival. It was community, kindness, and gratitude. At home, he and his wife spent the evening quietly, savoring the small joys that had seemed distant during the months of struggle. They prepared a simple meal together, laughing softly over minor mistakes in the kitchen. She was still weak, but her energy returned slowly each day, and he watched her with a mix of relief and wonder. The house, once heavy with worry, now felt light with hope. They talked about the future, about the things they would do once she regained full strength, and about how life, though unpredictable and sometimes harsh, could also reward resilience and love in ways that felt almost magical. He also began to see the changes in himself more clearly. The months of hardship had not just tested his love and determination, they had transformed him. He was stronger, more patient, more confident, and more empathetic. He had learned to appreciate small victories, to find hope in tiny gestures, and to value the kindness of strangers. The world had once seemed indifferent, but now he understood that compassion could appear in unexpected ways, and that perseverance, even in the darkest moments, could change everything. These lessons were invaluable, shaping not just his present but the way he would approach life forever. Over the following weeks, he continued to polish shoes, but now with a new perspective. The work that had once been purely out of desperation had become a symbol of resilience and pride. People began seeking him out for his skill, and his small income stabilized into something sustainable. The sense of dignity and purpose that came from honest work, combined with the relief of having saved his wife, created a foundation for a new life. He was no longer just a man fighting against impossible odds. He was a man who had proven that love, determination, and hard work could overcome even the most daunting challenges. His wife, growing stronger with each passing day, often reminded him not to overwork himself, though he continued with care and balance. They began to plan their lives together beyond survival, dreaming of small joys and ordinary happiness that had once seemed impossible. The bond between them deepened, strengthened not just by love but by the trials they had endured together. They understood each other in ways that only hardship and shared struggle could teach. Their connection became a quiet force, a reminder that life, though unpredictable, could also reward loyalty, patience, and unwavering care for one another. One day, he returned to the street where his journey had begun, standing for a moment in the same spot where he had first set up his small station. He looked at the busy passers-by, at the shops, the children playing, the vendors calling out, and he felt a quiet sense of gratitude. This corner, which had once been the site of exhaustion and uncertainty, had become a symbol of perseverance and change. He realized that life had given him not just the chance to save his wife, but also the opportunity to grow, to connect with others, and to discover strength he had never known existed within him. Each polished shoe, each small act of effort had built a path toward transformation. In the weeks and months that followed, life continued, quieter now, more stable, and filled with small joys. His wife's health improved steadily, and they were able to return to routines that had once been impossible. Their home, once heavy with worry, became a place of comfort and laughter. He still worked, still polished shoes, but the desperation that had driven him was replaced by purpose and pride. The stranger's advice, the kindness of others, and his unwavering love had created a new reality. What had seemed like an impossible struggle had led to a life richer in gratitude, connection, and resilience than he had ever imagined. He often thought about those who had helped him along the way, remembering each act of kindness, each piece of advice, and each encouraging word. He understood now that life was rarely a solo journey. Even the strongest person needed guidance, support, and sometimes a simple gesture of compassion to change the course of their life. He carried these lessons with him not just in his work but in the way he treated others. He became someone who noticed small acts of struggle in people, who offered help quietly, and who understood the power of encouragement and belief. Looking back on everything, he realized how far they had come. From desperation, fear, and exhaustion, they had moved to hope, health, and stability. The journey had been grueling, filled with long hours, pain, and uncertainty. but it had forged a strength and love that nothing could break. He held his wife's hand one evening, watching the sun set across the quiet streets, and felt a deep, unshakable sense of peace. They had survived the storm not just intact but transformed. Their lives, once fragile and uncertain, were now full of hope, possibility, and gratitude. And in that quiet moment, he understood a truth he had learned through every challenge and every long day. Love was stronger than despair. Determination could overcome the impossible, and human kindness, whether from a stranger or a friend, could change lives forever. He smiled at her and she smiled back, and together they faced the future, knowing that whatever hardships lay ahead, they had already proven that nothing could break their spirit or their bond. The struggle had ended, but the life it had forged was only beginning, bright, hopeful, and full of promise.